No, I know, but what not like see the regular time. I can have my
On my phone?
I have my own phone. I just usually I don't like my phone. I'll look at the first clock.
Okay. Is that okay? Yeah. Can you see if there's a 10? Yeah. If there's that window? If there's a 10.
After we'll get the card for the council member, but after that, we'll just go through 4 at a time. I don't think we need to
Yeah,
do.
they can't really, they can't do 4 unless you change the chairs.
I'll bring another chair up there.
Good evening, how are you? This really is a nice space.
Someone was telling me it was an outdoor, like
At one time, yep.
and they covered it in, and so it's nice, but all the cigar smokers are gone out. Like all the judges.
all the
He was telling
judges-
me there was like
all
a
the
judge who
judges
would
and-
sit out here and like in his
They're
shorts.
done.
He was telling me that the guy would sit here in his shorts in a row.
In the row,
with a cigar. Now he can't do it.
Sure. I think Matt's gonna sit here. Do they really see? Otherwise I'll feel like I'm like a leopard or something.
This is such a beautiful room. Feels so. Oh my God, I forgot my notebook. Do you have pages? I know I got the same page. Oh my God, since I don't ask for something.
Like by far the nicest room.
We've been in so far.
You live far from here or no? Right?
Not far. I mean, no traffic, 15 minutes, maybe less. Swear in the community board, Queens Community Board
Is there
members.
another feature?
Huh? I am, yes, yes.
Sit here.
Why is it so big? It's really significant because of the- I know. Good evening. I'd like to call the meeting to order of the 2018 Charter Revision Commission. My name is Rachel Gotzel. I'm the vice chair of the commission. I'd first like to invite the members to introduce themselves. And first of all, thank you all for coming out. This is really exciting as an opportunity to hear people talk about something incredibly important to our city. So thank you all. Sir, to my right.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. My name is Marco Carrion. I currently serve as commissioner for the Mayor's Community Affairs Unit.
Good evening. My name is Aneta Citron, and I'm the executive director of Chaya Community Development Corporation right here in Queens.
As I said, my name is Rachel Gotzel. I'm a professor of law at Rutgers Law School, where I focus on land use, environmental justice, and the intersection of race, poverty, and education. I also am the co-founder and director of the Perception Institute, which is a consortium that focuses on how we can best use social science to address issues of race, gender, and inequality. And again, thank you all for being here.
Good evening, I'm Kyle Bragg. I'm Secretary Treasurer of SEIU 32BJ, 160,000 member service union across the East Coast. And I welcome you this evening and all my fellow commissioners to my borough of Queens.
Good evening, John Siegel. I'm a practicing lawyer in Manhattan. I'm also one of the mayoral designees to the Civilian Complaint Review Board, which is why when representatives of that agency testified tonight, I will not be questioning them since I'm kind of on both sides of that. So.
I should add that I'm also a member of Community Board 13. If there's any of my fellow members testifying this evening, I will not be participating in the questioning portion of that panel either. Thank you.
So this is the fourth of 5 public borough hearings that we're holding in the 5 boroughs. And if you wish to testify, if you haven't already, please sign up at the table. As, again, many of you know, there's some familiar faces. Every mayor has an opportunity to appoint a charter revision commission to review the city charter, essentially the city's constitution, the document that organizes how the city can function and what laws are passed. Our role is to listen to people in the community who come to these hearings and who write comments. People can submit comments on the website and come up with recommendations to amend the charter, which will be put on the borough for all the voters to vote upon in November. We've conducted extensive outreach in advance of this meeting. Our goal is to have as many people as possible. You may have noticed people standing outside with a sign inviting you to attend and to testify. Of course, we followed all the notice procedures. And again, the primary goal is to ensure that as many people as possible have an opportunity to consider what we're considering and to provide insight to us and give us guidance as we consider this extraordinarily important task. So this meeting is being live streamed for those of you who want to have a second time to watch the meeting, and I'm sure that many of you will, at nyc.gov/charter. Videos and transcripts from our prior hearings and meetings are available on our website. And tonight, as at each hearing, we have sign language interpreters and loop listening devices available. If anyone requires translation to testify, please let us know. We have translators available, and we will give double time to anyone who requires translation to make sure that each person has an equal opportunity to share their insights with us. So, as we indicated, this hearing is about the charter. This is a public hearing, so the goal here is for us to listen to you and to hear your thoughts about what the charter revision proposals should focus upon. As, again, those of you who have been following this process know, this is a stage where we're narrowing our focus. We have to put a small number of proposals before the voters. Last week, our staff worked extraordinarily hard and presented the preliminary staff report, which, if you haven't read it yet, is available on our website, nyc.gov/charter. There's also an executive summary of the report, which has been translated into 10 languages. We're seeking public feedback on the preliminary staff report and recommendations, and the staff essentially invited the public to testify and share insight with us about 5 areas of focus described in the report: campaign finance reform, elections in New York City, civic engagement, community boards, and redistricting. If you wish to speak, please sign up at the welcome table. And needless to say, if there's an area of the city charter that you think we should be considering, please feel free to address that as well. We will have each speaker have 3 minutes. We'll be having panels of speakers, and what we'll do is have each speaker present their testimony, and then after the 4th speaker, the commissioners will have an opportunity to ask questions and, of course, invite responses. At this time, we would like to invite Councilman Darsh.
No, Danny Drum.
Oh, I'm sorry. At this time, we'd like to invite Councilman Drum. You're so important, you didn't even have a sign, so thank you so much. Okay, I'm glad that it is.
Just me on this panel?
For the elected officials, we're having singular panels, yes. Yes.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here, to see so many people and friends and colleagues that I work with on the commission, and I applaud the work that you're doing. New York City, and Queens in particular, have undergone a seismic demographic shift over the past few decades, perhaps the most dramatic in the country. But rather than reflect this change, our city relies on outdated methods for encouraging civic engagement. I ask that the Commission consider 2 important items aimed at reforming current practice: redrawing the community district lines and term limits for our community boards. Through community boards, New York City provides the opportunity for its citizens from all walks of life to become involved in shaping their communities. Community board positions should not be lifetime appointments, but rather opportunities for as many civic-minded neighbors as possible to participate in a valuable democratic exercise. Any revision of the charter should include 12-year limits for community board members. 12 years is ample time for both to build knowledge and experience and to make a significant mark. In 1975, when the community district lines were last drawn, Queens was comprised of nearly 85% white residents. Today, 61% are Asian, Hispanic, and African American. None of the boards come close to including adequate representation of these communities, including foreign-born residents who make up half of the borough of nations. The trend is not new. but the composition of our boards is lagging far behind. To take advantage of all our vibrant communities have to offer, we need to ensure the boards reflect the individuals who actually live and work there. As for community district boundaries, I would like to illustrate just one of the discrepancies caused by the outdated lines. Community District 7 encompasses a nearly 250,000 residents of Flushing and surrounding neighborhoods. The population of neighboring Community District 11 is less than half of that. The problem speaks for itself. Communities are dynamic, and so too should our community districts and boards be. The inclusion of these proposals in a revised charter will only strengthen democracy by allowing for flexibility and room for change. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Councilman. So this has been a topic that there have been a great deal of testimony about, and it seems as though the competing perspectives are, one, the idea that you suggested, and the importance, of course, of having diversity of representation on community boards. The other, about which many seem to feel as strongly, is the idea of institutional knowledge and people developing sufficient capacity to engage on, obviously, the very complex issues of land use that community boards address. Some have suggested that with attrition, there's sufficient opportunity for the diversity that you described to be achieved without the term limit. So I'd be really curious to hear your perspective on
Well, I
the
would
challenge.
disagree with that perspective, obviously. You know, I am a term-limited council member. I propose 12 years of a term of 12 limits for community boards. I was lucky enough to get the third term in the city council, and I feel that the first 4 years that I was in the council were, you know, it was a time when I needed to learn my job, so to speak. I thought I had a very productive second term, and now in my third term, I'm able to kind of finish up the projects that I started when I first came in as a council member. You know, so I hold elected officials, those who are in the community eye, those who serve the community. I think that, you know, a longer period of time in a position of power, like the power that community boards wield, in terms of land use and in terms of liquor licenses, other issues like that, for example, it should be limited, and it should also be distributed more equally amongst other members of the community, giving them the opportunity to participate in the community boards. With regard to the area of expertise, we in the council have staff that provide us with a lot of that expertise. I think that one of the things that we should look at, if we're going to look at term limits, is providing some expertise to community boards. First of all, I will say that they are underfunded, and we did in the council this year try to boost the funding that community boards get. Still not enough. We were successful, I think, in getting them about $40,000, but they do need to have some people in the community boards who would be able to provide some of that expertise to community board members. And not every community board has the expertise of land use people. Some do in areas where more professional, higher paid income folks might work, but in other areas, oftentimes that opportunity doesn't present itself.
Okay, thank you. Other questions?
Hello, council member.
Hello.
The council member is my council member. So it's nice to see you and to be on the other side.
Yes.
So just to follow my colleague's question, the notion of expertise. So one of the recommendations that we've heard is that each community board has a paid professional planner. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on that. If you thought that that would provide, and is that in your view, would each community board require that level of consistent capacity?
Well, I think that would be very helpful and very useful. I think one of the things that we would have to consider is the cost, obviously. But, you know, another thought that I had is that you could have a planner who would be shared with, you know, 2 or 3 community boards. And that person could be the expert person to whom those boards would turn to on those types of issues. So, you know, I think it comes down to the question of what is it that the city would be able to afford, really. Obviously, the best option there would be to have one person on each board, but short of that, I think the idea of having an expert who can work with 2 or 3 boards, 4 boards, might be an answer as well.
Are there additional questions?
Hello, council member. So we've also heard from some folks who've come and testified that in some boroughs, they have a difficult time actually fielding enough applicants for community boards, so actually have full boards. What would you say to that concern?
I've heard that concern, and I've seen that concern as well. But I think one of the reasons why you have people who don't want to participate is because they see the power on a community board in the hands of a very few. And they wonder how or what type of a change they can affect by becoming a member of that community board. And I think one of the problems for community boards is the inconsistency in which executive boards are chosen. Some executive boards have self-imposed term limits for their president, others do not. And I think that that is an area that we should also look at, how new members who come into boards can feel that they have an equal say in the decision-making process.
Thank you. Good evening, Councilman Drum. It's good to see you. I heard you testify in regards to term limits, but forgive me if I missed your testimony and you addressed this, but I'm asking if you have thoughts on the appointment process. If you have testified to it, forgive me if I missed it, but if you haven't, do you have any opinions about the appointment process in regards to community boards?
Yes. So the appointment process is very complicated and convoluted. For example, I don't really know who appointed people to my 2 community boards prior to me being elected. So oftentimes when I meet with the borough president, it's like, oh no, Helen Sears or John Sabini, or even somebody before, and John Sabini was a councilman in the 90s, so it's oftentimes hard to trace about who it is that we can nominate from our side of the council to say we either want to renominate them or even put up new members to become members of the community board. Ultimately, it's of course the decision of the borough president to appoint those community board members. But the other question is, oftentimes when district lines are redrawn, my district might expand or it might shrink in different community boards. Oftentimes when that happens, it's hard to know how many community boards I will lose in terms of representation on the board. I don't really have an idea as a council member, as an elected official, how those decisions are actually made.
Thank you.
Any additional questions? Thank you so much for your testimony.
Okay, thank you very much.
So if we could call Jonathan Darsh, Erwin Figueroa, Maggie Clark, and Henry Euler, please. Thank you so much. Mr. Darsh?
Thank you, Vice Chairperson Council,
If we could, thank you.
and members of the Charter Commission. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I'd also like to thank the staff of the Commission for all of their hard work throughout this process. My name is Jonathan Darsh, and I'm the Executive Director of the Civilian Complaint Review Board, or CCRB, which is an independent city agency that investigates, prosecutes, and mediates complaints of misconduct filed by civilians against New York City Police Department officers. In May 2018, the agency submitted a letter to the Commission detailing 4 proposed changes to Charter Chapter 18A, which governs the work of the CCRB. First, to codify the CCRB's Administrative Prosecution Unit, or the APU. Second, to enable the board to designate subpoena signatory power to the agency's highest-ranking staff. Third, to better define the department's duty to cooperate with agency requests for...
I apologize. Can I ask you to move the mic a little closer to you, sir? Thank you.
Third, to better define the department's duty to cooperate with agency requests for information and documents related to policy, outreach, and operational support. And fourth, to amend the CCRB budget to be 1% of the NYPD's budget. We've submitted this letter, along with my testimony this evening, for the public record, but I'm here tonight to focus on codification of the APU. The work of the APU is governed by a 2012 Memorandum of Understanding between the NYPD and CCRB. This is the first unit of its kind in the United States and heralded as a significant step for police oversight by local elected officials and advocates. The APU prosecutes nearly all of the cases in which the board recommends charges and specifications, the most serious disciplinary recommendation. Since the creation of the APU, the CCRB has administratively prosecuted officers for misconduct at 367 trials. As evidenced by the APU's prosecution of the Garner case, the APU is a vital part of the disciplinary process for officers who commit misconduct. Amending the city charter to codify the APU will ensure that this independent and effective tool for civilian oversight will continue. I welcome any further opportunity to discuss these changes with the Commission or its staff, and I am happy to answer any questions about the agency or our charter proposals.
Thank you. Mr. Figueroa?
Thank you, Vice Chair Gosel and the members of the New York City Charter Revision Commission for convening this hearing and discussing topics integral to the democratic health of our city. I am Erwin Figueroa. I'm a senior organizer at Transportation Alternatives. We are a 40-year-old nonprofit with more than 100,000 volunteers in our network dedicated to improving the safety of New York City streets. We appreciate and encourage this community's efforts to improve our city's community boards and making them open and accessible to more New Yorkers. We are here to support the preliminary recommendations of the committee with regards to the community boards. We support term limits for members and leadership in community boards, a more transparent and objective application process, access to urban planners for each community board, and bringing greater equity in community board membership. Our reason for strongly supporting these measures is because our work is closely tied to community board process. Proposals for life-saving street redesigns are traditionally brought to community boards for approval and at the committee and at the full board level. Because of this relationship, our organizers and volunteers spend hundreds of hours each year at community board meetings, and we have honed our views through that relationship. We strongly support the effort to impose term limits for community board members. 5 two-year terms is a good amount of time for a member to build knowledge and apply it in community board meetings. However, we would like to bring up additional measures to strengthen those measures. No grandfathering clause for current members. All community board members should be subject to term limits if the measures are passed as a ballot initiative. Today, corruption and personal enrichment at the public's expense exist among elected officials who are under far more scrutiny than community board members, who often operate with little transparency. These elected officials are typically limited to 2 terms of 4 years. By contrast, community board members are unelected, politically unaccountable, and face far less public scrutiny, and should not be allowed to accrue institutional power and influence for more than 10 years. Therefore, there should be no non-consecutive terms for community board members. We feel that members who have served a 10-year term can continue their civic engagement as a non-voting public member of the board or move on to other forms of civic engagement in the community. We also believe that public participation needs to be prioritized in the city charter to bring greater democracy. Public testimony must be permitted before formal presentation of city projects. And furthermore, participation from the general public must be enshrined and ensured at the committee level. And also, we support providing institutionalized urban planning expertise to community boards as well. Thank you.
Ms. Clark?
I'm Maggie Clark, PhD, founder of Inwood Preservation. Inwood Preservation is a group of over 750 members in northern Manhattan in favor of seeing charter change to reform ULURP and SECR. The SECR manual is deficient and does not follow state SECRA rules, which require that the local rulebook cannot be any less stringent than the state or federal. Any EIS also must do any reasonable study, and yet over and over again, the city's deficient manual is being quoted as an excuse for allowing an agency and a mayor that desperately wants development to blow off the community's comments and requests for reasonable studies. The SECR manual, from our understanding, was never a law, but an administrative action, and they're treating it as law. Also, environmental impact statements are supposed to be done prior to planning. When the National Environmental Policy Act was passed, it was for the purpose of showing in advance of an action all the environmental and social impacts so as to influence and possibly modify or abandon the proposed action. The EIS was not supposed to be an afterthought, and yet this is exactly how the city does ULURP. Those entities that are voting for or against the zoning plan, community board, borough president, city planning commission, city council, do not have the benefit of a final EIS, so the impact statement is an afterthought and meaningless to planning. And that can be disastrous for a neighborhood like mine, where decisions are made blindly and the community is ill-equipped with insufficient infrastructure, awful environmental impacts, social displacements, and the like. The regional plan, the changes that are needed, all planning by city planning or EDC must come after full EIS process. Community outreach must be considerably bolstered. Current process ensures a tiny fraction of residents and businesses are aware of rezoning or other changes. Informative, neutral postal communications to every resident and business well ahead of every EIS process in ULURP should occur. The EIS process and the planning process in general should actually utilize community-based plans such as we developed, not have faux community input sessions by agencies. Thousands of Inwood community testified and have been ignored. All local media should be involved, educating the population. Local groups should be given funding for independent research and outreach. The use of the state secret manual until the cities can be made at least as stringent. ULURP should not begin until the FEIS has been released and public participation completed. Community boards, borough presidents, city planning commissioners, and city council members should not have to vote prior to seeing an FEIS. Agencies should be required to publicly release all documents pertaining to ULURP and EIS on the date of the documents, and finally, halt any ULURP on any area-wide rezoning immediately until these changes are made, and reverse ULURP decisions made using flawed seeker manual or EIS processes within the last 2 years.
Thank you, Ms. Clark. Mr. Euler?
My name is Henry Euler. I'm the first vice president of the Auburndale Improvement Association and a member of Queens Community Board 11. I'm also a vice president of the Queens Civic Congress and a member of the Queens Preservation Council. My testimony today represents my own opinions and not necessarily those of the organizations that I belong to. With regards to community boards, there have been proposals that community board members should be term limited. I disagree with that stance. I have served on my local community board for several years and have seen firsthand the importance of experience on my board. The institutional knowledge that our seasoned board members possess assists with decision-making with frequent regularity. Many of the experienced people on my board have lived in their communities for long periods of time and understand the needs and workings of those communities. This year, 6 new members joined my board. Last year, 6 other new members joined as well. We still have 6 vacancies on my board. We have an excellent mix in terms of diversity, age, and viewpoints. My board is changing naturally, with long-time members gradually leaving the board and those seats being replaced by new people every year. There's no need to remove from the board knowledgeable, unpaid volunteers who have served with distinction and integrity over the course of several years to better their communities. I believe that this is the case for many boards across the city. Term limiting will result in weaker boards, in my opinion, because of the loss of experienced members. Also, we also have to realize that the borough president and the council member appoints board members and renews the membership every 2 years. And if a board member is not doing his or her job, then they should be dismissed from the board. If they're absent too many times, they should be dismissed so that other people can take over. I also made several comments in my testimony about voting procedures. I think that all the new ideas, early voting, absentee voting, without having to give a reason for doing so, These are all important aspects that need to be put into effect to increase voter participation in our city. I also made several comments about land use issues, and I know that at this point you're considering that more or less in future commissions for discussion. But I had written all of that out in my testimony as well. Thank you so much for letting me testify today, and thank you for coming to hear what we have to say as well.
Thank you so much. So I'm curious, Mr. Figueroa, how you respond to the testimony, and obviously the topic that you raised as well, and whether or not again, this question of experience and institutional knowledge, particularly in the context, and in some sense this brings up Ms. Clark's testimony of the complexity of land use. How do you balance between the goal of diversity and representation and the notion that there's some benefits that are really important to having sufficient institutional knowledge on community boards?
Yeah, so in regards of the term limits and in regards to diversity, I think as New York City neighborhoods change, it's important to having that representation, and having a community board that truly have a representative nature of the community is important for the community to feel that the community board is taking the decisions that best represent their interests. In regards of having community board members and that institutional knowledge, that can be implemented in terms of having systems where current members can partner with new members and have the institutional knowledge be passed along to new members. In regards of having those difficult topics as land use, transportation can be one of them as well. Having dedicated urban planners in each of the community boards is going to be great in order to bridge that gap between the knowledge that we bring as a community to the process and also the professional aspects, the technical aspects that can be difficult at times to be understood by the general public.
Thank you so much. Other questions?
Thank you. I'd like to just address your true comparison between elected officials and community board members. And clearly there's a difference between being elected and being in a paid position versus being in a volunteered position and being appointed. Can you kind of talk to that issue for me, please?
So in regards to that issue, the main thing is that the process of how community board members get to be on a community board can sometimes, in different community boards, can be a little bit difficult to understand, especially for people in the public. We personally, Transportation Alternatives, we hold in each borough, we hold informational meetings of how people can join community boards. But even between each borough, the process of how to get on a community board is a little bit, it's sometimes not clear. And I think that lack of accountability sometimes can discourage new people that would like to be part of the community board to not apply, because the rules of how they apply and get into a community board can sometimes not be extremely clear. I think with term limits, it will help by having a standard at the very least to know how much time would each community board will be serving, each community board member.
Other questions?
I actually have a question for the gentleman at the end. I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch your full name. I wonder what your thoughts are on if there were to be term limits, if there was a requirement that, if folks were allowed to take a break and then come back for a year, how would you feel about that?
Well, I think that we can always still participate at community boards if we are on the board or not on the board. We have ample opportunity to make comments at my particular board. We have public participation. We also have an opportunity for the public to give their opinions about the different land use cases that come up. So I think that we can always participate in board discussion. That's pretty much what I think.
All right, thank you all so much for testifying. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Betty Bratton, Philip Pappas, Mark Laster, and Lucy Scalero. And I apologize if I mispronounce anyone's name. Oh, yes, thank you. Staff can. So why don't we start, please, sir?
Okay, hello. I'm Philip Pappas. I'm the chairperson from Community Board 3 in Queens. That covers Jackson Heights, East Elmhurst, and North Corona. I don't want to be too redundant about term limits, so after what else was said already, but I'll just add that I am in favor of term limits. I think 10 to 12 years sounds like about right in terms of allowing people to get through the learning curve and knowing the whole process. I also strongly feel that the position of chair should possibly be an even shorter limit. I'm proud to say that CB3 has a 3-year term limit, 3-term limit for community board chairs, which I think is really important. Having said all this about term limits, I just want to go on record as saying I really treasure our senior members and have really benefited from their mentorship. So as far as the grandfathering thing, it's a difficult thing to say because it might need to be a sliding scale or something along those lines to ensure that there's the proper mentorship for new members. It is definitely a concern. I'm not sure exactly how that would work out in terms of the nuts and bolts, but something to keep in consideration. But I think it's important to have term limits because as board members, we're serving the community, not the other way around. And the community is constantly changing. We have to really represent not only what's come before and what exists today, but we have to be proactive and think of the future and the always changing demographics in our neighborhoods. So I think it's really important to reflect that by allowing new membership. And I'll quickly add 2 points as far as the reappointment process, which I think would help with this. One is involvement with the board committees. Currently, as I understand it, part of the reappointment process is that the consideration of attendance is taken into account, but it really, as far as I know, just reflects the monthly public hearings. It is not affected by committee attendance. I know from my own experience, the first year that I was a board member, I basically did the minimum requirement, feeling it out, just went to the monthly meetings, signed up for the minimum 2 committees, and did not feel like I was being an effective board member. So the second year, I approached our chair, our district manager, the councilman who sponsored my membership, and asked them, what more can I do? And just kept getting pointed to committees. Show up, roll up your sleeves, and do the work. And I know that on our board, we do have a solid core of members, many of them very senior members, who do most of the heavy lifting. And I would love to see the entire board be more involved. And I know that for me, being on that committee level has made me a better board member, more informed, more familiar with the process. And I think that that's something that will quickly make the new influx of members better community board members and help them learn the whole process much quicker. That should be, I think, a requirement, the attendance to committees for appointment and reappointment. And finally, just for new members coming in, having email access and text access. It's hard as a chair for me to contact people by phone or wait for people via mail. So I think that that should be an expectation for new members.
Thank you so much.
Good evening. My name is Lucy Scalero, and I run the organization known as the Coalition of United Residents for a Safer Community. I've been an active member for 40 years, but on the community board for 32 years. And that's because my community has been diverse from the very beginning. When I went out, I had to do it in Spanish, Chinese, and even Indian. Now I have Pakistani, Bangladesh, and I have to deal with Urdu, Farsi, and much more. Still do it today. When I go out, I have to do it in different languages. When I bring them to my board, they get a little intimidated because they don't speak the English very well. Others are new to the community. I don't believe in term limits. You cannot put a price on volunteerism, and you can't put a price on the time you give to the people of your community and those that live in your community. We don't get paid. We don't get compensation. And to have this kind of dedication and time for your committees on a community board takes a lot of sacrifice. Even when I come here to the borough president, I left my family tonight as well as my job to make this point. You can't put a price on it. So I'm going to make a suggestion to you, being around a long time. We have quadrupled in population. Take that population and grow. We probably even need another council seat. Build the community boards up. Leave the seniors in to be of some assistance. They've got great knowledge, and I'm one of them. Put at least another 5 or 6 more to the boards. They can only take in new members. Use the census as a guideline for those boards, because sometimes they don't know how to reach out. They use the census, they'll say, all right, we have so many seniors, we have so many people middle-aged, let's look at the census and see what we need to build this board as it should be. That goes to the churches, the mosque, organizations, anything that we can use to reach out, and mandate it that those boards get those people in with those extra 5 or 6 seats. As time goes on, I can say this, many seniors do move on, some through illness, some through death, some, unfortunately for myself, who has Parkinson's now, so they've left. And they were my biggest supporters when I did my civic group. And it hurts me greatly. I'm also insulted because Daniel Jum had 12 years to figure out how we're put in. I'm put in every time because I've been loyal to my community. I didn't run away. I didn't go to a different state. I stayed and helped my community with all the different nationalities. And it's been proven in books and in magazines. Now I have another thing. Training. We didn't go to anything. Still today, I'm trying to figure all the laws for SLA, ULIP, DOB, you name it. I'm going to make a suggestion at least once or twice a year. The borough president, I hope she doesn't mind, she's been great to us, would give out better training for each of the board members. We'd get a very quick training lessons on zoning. We don't even know what we're doing. When they come to us and we want to, I'll make this quick, we don't even know what we're doing when we make our vote. They come to the community board and we have to make a decision quickly. We need more training. And I ask you this, and I hope you take some of these suggestions with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good evening. My name is Mark Lassner, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker who has been in practice for over 37 years. During this time, I have served in numerous civic leadership positions, starting as a student senator right here at Queens College, served as president of my co-op board, president of a temple, and I'm currently the co-chair of the Forest Hills Green Team, a team leader for the Medical Reserve Corps, and co-chair of Community Board Number 6's Aging and Social Services Committee. As is mentioned in the 2018 preliminary staff report, I agree that there needs to be term limits for community board members, balancing out the need for institutional memory and the need to have new voices. I also see more of a need to have term limits for executive officers to allow for new leadership of the community board. I also support the idea of both standardizing the appointment and recruitment process for community board members, as well as standardizing meeting procedures. In the appointment and recruitment process, there should be a stronger attempt made to reach out to disenfranchised members of our community. I would suggest reaching out at Social Security offices, homeless shelters, SNAP offices, etc., to empower people who receive city services to give them more control of their lives. As for standardizing meeting procedures, live streaming would be a great idea to encourage more participation, but I also would suggest to standardize that all public comment should be made at the beginning of the meeting. And finally, I would suggest, I did not see mention in the preliminary report, and I did see the chair, where we were talking about committee meetings that are very important. I would suggest, I think it varies from community board to community board. Some community boards, I think, have more meetings than others. So I think it should be standardized across the board. And I think we should at least mandate the standing committee should meet quarterly. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Betty Brayton. I'm a lifelong Queens resident. In the interest of full disclosure, please be advised that I am a member of Queens Community Board 10 and also serve as the chairperson of Community Board 10. Since your preliminary report was issued in July when community boards do not normally meet, there has not yet been an opportunity for Community Board 10 to discuss and formulate a formal position to present to you this evening. Therefore, my remarks to you this evening reflect my opinions, not necessarily those of the board. However, I believe my remarks to you will generally reflect the opinions of many others who also serve on Community Board 10 with me. Among the proposals you're considering are imposing term limits, standardizing the appointment process, and providing additional resources. In your report, you state that, quote, while perspectives on specific reforms differed, the testimony received confirmed the notion that More than 50 years after their addition to the charter in 1963, community boards are central to civic engagement in New York City, unquote. And that is true. In my opinion, the major reason boards are central to civic engagement is that they have had the ability and flexibility to adapt over time to represent the people living and working in the chunks of this city's geography that they represent. Despite our city's size, we are not a cookie-cutter place. While there are basic similarities common to all areas, there are many differences between our boroughs. What would work well in one borough might not be so workable in another borough. One thing my long experience in local neighborhood civic activism and on a community board has taught me is that the concept of centralism may be a good thing, but it often does not have a positive result in the reality of implementation. Sometimes, when evaluating a one-size-fits-all idea, I like to put our community boards in the list that's attached to the testimony I left at the desk, which is just a list of all of the cities in New York State that have populations over 20,000 people. And you could see where community boards in this city and in this borough rank. We would be cities among the most sizable cities in this state. And I like to look at it that way sometimes because it gives us the idea of where we fit in the relationship of population. But Buffalo, Rochester, and Syracuse are all cities. They do some things mandated by the state in certain ways. They don't have every procedure that they use in their zoning boards, their whatever commissions they have, whatever representative bodies they elect, are not all the same. They're all done legally and fairly, I would assume, but they're not all the same. And it doesn't have to be the same throughout the city. You know, when we look at community boards, we should look at them from that perspective and realize that we don't have to be cookie cutter. In my opinion, the charter rightfully gives the responsibility for appointed community board members to the borough president and city council members. Each borough president has the obligation, can I continue? Has the obligation to follow the charter requirements and consider whether or not the appointments viewed in the aggregate fairly represent all segments of the community. The report that you've issued goes on to state that I lost my thought here. The neighborhoods represent the different geographic sections and neighborhoods and consider whether the appointments viewed in the aggregate fairly represent all segments of the community. Many commenters to the commission, you went on to say, contended that repeated reappointment of the same members has resulted in community boards lacking sufficient ideological or demographic diversity, and that the membership of community boards may no longer reflect that.
Ms. Brayton?
Yeah.
We absolutely want to hear what you have to say, but we do have a lot of people to testify.
No problem. You have a copy of my written testimony.
Thank you so much. I appreciate
that. Count me as part of that institutional knowledge.
We appreciate that.
And I'm going to just, if you bear with me 1 minute, I'm going to give you just one quick example of why institutional knowledge is important. In my board, we have a major sewer street reconstruction project going on. It has been, from start to finish, 25 years in the making. Without the institutional knowledge of my colleagues who have been there from the beginning to the end, that project would still be sitting out there in limbo, waiting to get constructed. But having all of the knowledge of this happened then, that happened then, helps.
Okay. Any questions?
Thank you for your courtesy.
Thank you so much, and we do very much value your opinion. Questions? So I would just like to note and thank all of you, because the fact that we had 4 people with differing points of view who gave such thoughtful testimony and treated each other so civilly is exactly the kind of civic engagement we need to see. So thank you to all of you.
That's
Queens.
We are the world's borough.
All right, thank you all. Michael Moore, Tom Speaker, Philip Condon, and Helen Ho, please.
So good evening, and thank you, Commission. My name is M.K. Moore. I'm a resident of Community Board 9 Queens. And I'm here tonight to request allow us to vote for immediate implementation of term limits on community boards. Representation is the cornerstone of our democracy. The longer anyone retains power over the democracy, the less democratic it becomes. The continual transition of power is the core principle of our constitutional republic. The absence of term limits dilutes or removes the ethics of responsibility in elected or appointed officials. As a resident of Community Board 9 Queens, our board does not now, nor has it for a long time, represent the demographic of our community. I'll talk about diversity. I also talk about the socioeconomic makeup of our board as well as our community, which has changed. There is an absolute belief, and it is true, that community board members are appointed for life, and they represent the special interest groups that bring them to the board over the will of our community. Our community board members openly refer to a restricted member civic group in our community as their sister organization, and that group is consulted prior to any decisions being made by our board. If you're not a member of that civic group, you're not a part of that decision-making process. The existing rules governing community boards serve to disenfranchise large majorities of our citizens, and the selection process and term of office are slanted towards these people that are already sitting on the board. Exemption of current members from any newly imposed term limits is going to dilute the Commission's proposed revision and place another 30-year timeline on our change. I'm very much aware of institutional knowledge, but for example, on our community board, that's measured in multiple centuries, and I'm not sure just how much institutional knowledge we really need. I think that something less than that would be appropriate. I think the Commission has an opportunity to make a very big difference citywide. You can make a change that will enhance the communities, broaden representation, and return the voice back to all the residents and not just these isolated groups. I ask you to focus to get this issue on the ballot and allow our voters to improve the democracy in our city and bring reform and a vote back to the people. And thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Tom Speaker, and I'm a volunteer member of the New York chapter of Represent Us, whose mission is to pass tough anti-corruption laws in cities and states across America and to end the legalized corruption that has come to define modern politics. Thank you for holding this hearing and allowing me the opportunity to testify. So the Charter Revision Commission's preliminary report put forth 5 great proposals for improving democracy in New York City, among them ranked choice voting. So the arguments in favor of ranked choice voting are sound. Under the current system, small pluralities are enabled to determine who represents a district, making it so that in some cases, a large majority of voters will oppose the candidate who wins an election. By changing the system so that voters are allowed a second choice, ranked choice voting allows for a fairer and more representative democracy. So a common question about RCV is whether it would...
Sir, could you back away a little bit from the mic? Thank you.
Okay. A common question about RCV is about whether it would create confusion among voters. Like, that concern is understandable, as ranked choice voting can seem complicated to those who are unfamiliar with it. But when cities have implemented RCV in concert with civic organizations, the vast majority of voters end up understanding and approving of the new system. One recent successful example is Santa Fe, which used ranked choice voting in its elections for the first time this year. For a city of 71,000 people, Santa Fe spent about $100,000 on voter outreach and collaborated with numerous organizations to educate voters about the changes. According to a report by the city government, Santa Fe hosted over a dozen public trainings and events spread out over 4 city council districts, and through multiple campaigns generated more than 2 million impressions on Twitter, Facebook, and local media news sources. In exit polls, 81% of voters said they were very satisfied with the experience, and 77% said they'd support using RCV again. Now, effectively educating voters on ranked choice voting would cost the city money, and the exact amount is uncertain. Were New York to spend at the same rate as Santa Fe, that's $100,000 per 71,000 voters, the total cost might be about $11 million. The city already spends more than $11 million on voter education and outreach, and much of a ranked choice voting campaign could be merged into that process. It's important to remember that $11 million would only be 0.0001% of New York City's $89 billion annual budget, which is a small price to pay for a stronger democracy. New York City has done some great work for its residents, but voter disenfranchisement and rampant inequality make it clear that there's still a long way to go. We're at a moment when voters want bold, sweeping ideas rather than the marginal improvements that have defined politics over the past several decades. With the Charter Revision Commission, our city has an opportunity to be a national leader in democratic reform, and we think that implementing ranked choice voting across city elections is just the kind of initiative we need. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Good evening. Good evening, Commission, and thank you for this opportunity. My name is Philip Condon, and I am a resident of Queens for the last 50 years, and I am here to speak a few words about how community boards need to be reformed in Queens. First and foremost, term limits need to be in place for all community board members. If our legislative and executive branches have term limits, I believe that community board members should also have term limits. Presently, there are no term limits, and too many of our communities are not properly represented by our community boards. Our community demographics are not a true representation of our present community board members. This needs to change, and as soon as possible. Our community boards need to have a more diverse membership and have term limits. In doing so, it makes our communities more democratic and fair for all of us, not a select few that's presently taking place in Queens right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello. Good evening, members of the Charter Revision Commission, and thank you for hosting these hearings. My name is Helen Ho. I'm currently a board member of Queens Community Board 1, and additionally, since 2004, I have attended community board meetings, district service cabinet meetings, and community board committee meetings in every single community board in Queens, all 14 of them, in addition to other boroughs, in my capacity as Mayor Bill de Blasio's Director of Queens while serving in the Mayor's Office of Community Affairs, also as a Parks Department employee, as a Health Department employee, and as a private citizen. I trust that you have heard a lot, especially at this table here, about the lack of diversity and the true neighborhood representation on community boards. There is much that can be done to encourage more diverse participation. I offer 2 suggestions for making community boards actually work for the community. First, I recommend term limits be instituted for members serving on the community board. Newer members are often intimidated and have a hard time speaking up and assuming leadership positions at board meetings without having 15 years of tenure on the community board to give them legitimacy. I would recommend term limits be around 12 years for each board member. I'm not opposed to previous board members rejoining the board after being term limited out, but it should be after a significant period of time, perhaps equal to their time served, to ensure that new voices also have an opportunity of being heard. Secondly, I recommend a budget for language access, food, and childcare during meetings. In our diverse city, we should be able to accommodate non-English speakers, parents, and the general public's ability to participate. Community board meetings are typically held for English speakers only who are either retired or have 9-to-5 jobs, don't currently have young children, and are okay with regularly not eating dinner during dinner time, like right now. How is this acceptable? Not only is there no incentive for participating among these groups, but there is a hindrance and a cost to participating at community board meetings in its current systems. Those of you with community engagement backgrounds will understand that it is more difficult and expensive to engage people beyond the same 20 members in each community that come to every meeting. But I strongly believe that this is a necessary change in order to have true representation and increased diversity at community board meetings. Again, I'm glad that we're having this conversation, and I hope that you'll take my 14 years of experience regularly attending more than 14 community board meetings across New York City into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. So Ms. Ho, I do have a question. With respect to the resources that are provided to community boards, we've heard many people suggest that every community board should have an urban planner, and you've just made a suggestion having to do with resources perhaps used for some alternative, very important use, such as language access. Would you, and in our previous, the previous testimony, there was a suggestion that obviously not every community board is a cookie cutter. So would your suggestion be perhaps that community boards have resources allocated to them that they could choose to use for either, again, a choice of an urban planner or language access or whatever is needed? Or how would you balance the different interests that have been suggested, all of which are clearly important?
I mean, I think at all city meetings that there should be language access, right? At every city meeting conducted, community board, any public city meeting should have language access no matter what, right? And, not every meeting is the same. And so obviously every community board is going to be different. I don't necessarily think that community boards should have to choose between having an urban planner or having language access services, right? Because maybe a community board like CB3 in Jackson Heights might need both, right? So I'm not sure what the answer to that is, right? In a perfect world, we would have everything.
Other questions? Thank you. Oh.
I do have a question. Thank you all for your testimony. I have a question for the gentleman from Represent Us regarding ranked choice voting. Is your view that ranked choice voting should apply to all offices, not just citywide offices?
I support applying it to all offices. Like one example, I think someone brought this up at the Brooklyn hearing, was that Donovan Richards District, I think that's District 31, they had a special election back in 2013. That's city council, right? Where you had eight candidates. It was about 9 candidates altogether, and then you had one who was more conservative, and then the others were quite liberal. But that one conservative candidate actually took up a large enough section of the vote that he almost managed to win the whole election. Ultimately, Donovan Richards only ended up winning that by about 80 votes, I think. It just barely managed to avoid a recount. And if you had ranked choice voting there, it really wouldn't have been close. Like, most of the votes went to Donovan Richards and this more conservative challenger. And then it's likely that for the other candidates, the second, third, fourth, fifth votes would have, all ended up going to more liberal candidates, which would have created a better balance. So yeah, I mean, I think it should be applied to those types of races as well.
Any additional questions? Thank you all so much for your thoughtful testimony. So if we could have Ben Turner, Joel Kuzai, Bill Meek, and Toby Shepard Block, please.
My writing is bad. It's Bill Meehan. Good evening, and thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to talk tonight. I'm privileged to be a community activist from Jackson Heights, and I'm here speaking on my own behalf and not for the community board or for other organizations I belong to. I'm a member of many civic and political groups, and my testimony tonight is gleaned from my participation in those groups. I'm in my 5th term as a member of Community Board 3 in Jackson and Queens, where I serve on the executive committee, where I co-chair the airport committee, and I'm a member of transportation and land use committees. I'm also a member of Citizens Union for the past 15 years, and on the local candidates committee with them and combined municipal and state affairs committee. Both CU and CB3 have influenced my thinking on community boards, but again, I am not officially speaking for either one of them. CU has weighed in on 3 areas where it sees a tension that would greatly benefit the functioning of community boards and through them benefit the city. I participated in these discussions as a member of CU, and as a CB3 member was able to supply a realistic view to our theoretical discussions. We believe, and I concur, that community boards should receive an independent budget allocation that is not at the discretion of the mayor or the council. Community boards are in their 55th year, and yet for some people we're still the new kid on the block, and for others the kid not wanted on the block. During the Bloomberg years, the budgets of CBs, CCRB, and the public advocate were substantially reduced. This should not be allowed to happen again, and an independent budget allocation would ensure that it does not happen again. I would like to see a mechanism created that an available pool of urban planners be independent of the borough president's office and be able to be accessed by community boards. I think, in hearing what other people talk about, for cost effectiveness, that a number of boards could share a planner. I also think that community board members need ongoing education, and this should be provided not in classrooms, but online. And finally, I'm in favor of term limits. I believe it's necessary to bring new members in and new ideas. I'm a firm believer that community service is the rent we ought to pay for the privilege of living in a diverse community. I'm grateful for the opportunity of being a member of Queens Community Board 3 and for the opportunity of working alongside such a group of talented and dedicated people. Thank you for the opportunity to present views this evening, and thank you for your service.
Thank you.
My name is Joel Kushai. I'm a former community board member. And I've served 2 terms before deciding not to renew for a third. In 2013, it was suggested to me by a friend in my neighborhood that I might consider joining the local board. I applied, met with my council member, and was approved, and served beginning in 2013. If I have any advice for the commission, it would be to institute term limits for board members and to engage some way of ensuring that community boards observe the open meetings law. On my time on the board, that was not done consistently. I'll get into that more, but that issue was one of the reasons why I chose not to continue. It was difficult to find information about what even some of the committees on the board were doing. I asked to join the Transportation Committee board and was ignored. And then we would receive reports from this Transportation Committee, and we didn't know when it was meeting or who was on it, and that was just the beginning. These discussions took place in a kind of vexed environment surrounding the Woodhaven SBS plan. I was a proponent of the plan, had many questions, could not really get the kind of information that I needed, reached outside of the community to Riders Alliance, Transportation Alternatives, and other like-minded groups just to get information, and was kind of ridiculed, called an outsider, a foreigner, in my own neighborhood by some of the leaders on the board. I think that having term limits would do a lot to ensure that some of the fiefdoms and kingdoms that develop with some of the factions, some of the regional factions, or some of the ideological grounded, say, pro-business or pro-car kind of people would be mitigated. There would be more opportunity. People wouldn't be able to kind of cling so tightly and develop those kind of power bases. I agree very strongly with the point that was made previously about the relationship of the civics. I think that they have too much power. They influence too greatly. They can mobilize a huge army. I didn't represent anyone. I was speaking only for myself when serving on the board, and was demonized for asking that we use facts in our discussions and not personal anecdotes. Some of the anecdotes seem to portray conflicts of interest, just spelled out right there for everyone to see, and yet nothing was said. Senior members of the board got a pass. They could yell and scream and insult people, and nothing was done. I speak up, and I'm demonized. Council members, my council members' aide pulled me aside in this very building to say that the council member did not like the way that I was speaking out on behalf of SBS. And then I was told that I had to come in to see her in order to continue my renewal application. I decided not to proceed. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good evening, Commission. My name is Toby Shepard Block. I'm a resident of Glendale. I'm a member of Community Board 5 and the co-chair of the Transportation Committee. I too support some sort of mechanism to ensure turnover in community board membership on a regular basis, and to ensure that community boards reflect the communities that they are intended to represent. I was drawn to my board also around the issue of enhanced public transportation in the district and enhanced street safety when I heard members of the community board who purported to represent me and my family only representing the interests of car drivers. A proposal that would have taken 25% of the street space of Woodhaven Boulevard and dedicated it to 33% of the street users was ridiculed and dismissed out of hand. And it became clear that my community board was going to become a loud voice of opposition to this plan. And that catalyzed me to action, to join my board, and to join specifically the Transportation Committee before I was appointed to the board. And I share that detail with you because I think that is the answer to this question of experience and institutional knowledge. One need not be a voting member of the entire community board to be an active participant. There are other avenues to engage the board and to express your views to agency staff and other stakeholders making decisions that are quite effective. I joined that committee as a clearly dissenting voice because I was able to engage with the members of the board. I was able to join the leadership of that committee and have a more equitable conversation around this project. And so there are multiple avenues for engagement, and I think the lifelong appointment system is simply broken. In my time on the board, I've seen multiple younger, more diverse members appointed to the board that are more reflective of the community, and they have oftentimes left after a single term so dispirited by the hostility to new voices and new perspectives on the board. Hearing from people that have been on the board for 20, 30, 40, 45 years, this is the way it is. There's nothing that we can do. This is the way the city works. Just live with it. And people lose their spirit, and they become despondent, and they resign. And so as a board member who's trying to make sure that our board really does respond to the needs of the entire community, when you see a couple like-minded folks join you on a board and you think that there's a ray of light, that there's some hope to stick this out for a little longer, it becomes very hard to continue your service, and it doesn't seem like it's a useful way to spend your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi there, my name is Ben Turner, and I'm on Community Board 11. I'm speaking here on my own behalf. And I too would like to see some form of term limits brought to community boards. I think there's a real need for new voices on community boards, for a diversity of voices, greater representation and reflection of the communities they serve. And I'd just like to echo some of the other comments that have been voiced here. I've been on the CB for the last year, and I've really been dismayed by the treatment of younger and newer community board members. A colleague of mine was verbally abused at a meeting just this past year, was told that he had an agenda for no real particular reason other than that the senior member making the comment seemed to have a dislike for him. Other senior members have audibly scoffed during the public comment session towards members of the public who voiced concerns about sea level rise in an area like Bayside. I've personally I've been told or had it implied to me that I was too young to understand things, that I didn't have the expertise needed to understand issues, and made it clear that my input wasn't welcome. And it's just really dispiriting when we're trying to contribute to our city. We want to make our communities better, and there's so many of our ideas are just treated with such hostility. I think term limits would be very helpful in ensuring greater turnover and greater diversity on community boards. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Any questions from the commissioners?
Just one quick one. I've heard testimony saying that the term limits, turnover should be regular and term limits would be helpful. Any sense of what that looks like? Because no one offered up an idea of what term limits might look like.
I think 8 to 10 years myself.
8 to 10.
Okay.
10 to 12.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think 10 years with one term off would be a minimum benchmark for that.
Thank you.
I would say also that that should stand for the executive committees as well.
Great. Thank you all very much. Joseph Marzliano, Dominic Stiller, Martha Liberton, and Clive Williams, please.
Thank you for the opportunity. Commissioners, elected officials, colleagues, and neighbors. My name is Joseph Marziliano, and I'm the district manager for Community Board 11. I wanted to attend tonight's public hearing to be able to testify that in 2015, Community Board 11 responded to the proposed legislation regarding community board term limits proposed by Councilmember Drum by resoundingly voting against that measure. The community board that I work for actually is against term limits on the notion of institutional knowledge, and I'd like to expand on that a little bit tonight. I do agree that the boards do need additional support and resources to perform our duties, and that the recruitment process can be enhanced to better inform the public of all the good work that the boards do. However, I strongly disagree with the proposal to impose term limits on board members to improve the diversity of the communities served. Yes, there may be board members who should not be reappointed for an additional term. There are board members that should be outright dismissed. The current system of council member and borough president appointments are adequate to this end, given political courage to do so. We are lucky that in the borough of Queens, especially in our community board, that Community Board 11 is comprised of members that are younger adults and seniors, black and white, Hispanic and Middle Eastern, East Asian and South Asian, from the public sector and the private sector, lawyers, healthcare professionals, general contractors, and everything in between. This includes some board members of over 30 years. One of those board members was our chairperson for over 30 years. He once wrote that, and I quote, since its beginning, CB11 has held more than 400 public hearings on variances, zoning changes, and land use matters. Prior to 1969, this process did not exist. Community boards have brought sunshine into communities throughout the city, giving communities some input in the planning process that would impact their lives. This is the kind of institutional knowledge that I recommend protecting. On my community board, we would lose 19 members if 8 to 10-year term limits were implemented, leaving us with 26. We did not regularly get enough appointments to even have a full board at 50. This would eviscerate our institution, which I believe is important. The time it takes to learn how to navigate city bureaucracy as an unpaid volunteer takes years to become versed. And I truly believe that the work that these people do for decades and better deserves to be honored, not simply dismissed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I've got my writing here. Hi, thank you very much for all the work that you're doing. Let me find my notes. Thanks for listening to my opinion. I'm here to discuss term limits in community boards. My name is Dominic Stiller. I was raised in Eastern Queens. I'm a resident of Western Queens. I own a structural engineering firm in Western Queens, 17 employees. My wife and I own a gastropub in Western Queens, also 17 employees. I'm a past president of the Dutch Kill Civic Association, presently a member of CB1 in my 3rd year. I've lived in Manhattan, Long Island, London, and I'm happy to call Queens my home. I appreciate and am honored to have been appointed to our community board, but I don't think it's best for me to, or assume I should have the right to, serve forever. To assume that only a tiny fraction of the public could and should represent our entire diverse, changing community for decades smacks of hubris and self-interest. It is not like our seat is validated by periodic re-election. We are not re-elected. We serve forever. We are not the Supreme Court, we are not the Pope, yet we can serve forever. Communities change in density and demographic. I think it is obvious that community makeup changes much quicker than change by natural attrition. Internet research shows no clear purposeful reason why term limits were not included in the original 63 charter. I suspect it was simply overlooked or possibly strategically ignored in the transition process. However, it is natural and healthy to tweak a program after implementation. I wonder how many local social issues encountered over the past 50 years may have been partially or significantly helped by term limits at the community board level. I'm going to go a little bit off mic, and I'm going to wrap up my conclusion after. I have a few examples here of things in the 70s, such as, I just want to say this. Perhaps the notion that term limits should be for life is just so, you land from outer space and you come and you start talking to people and they say, what, for life? There's really some wacko aspect to it. And we're all so serious here and we're discussing the little tweaks of it, but how in the world did it ever evolve? Well, it did. And it probably did due to limitations on imperfect social justice and other reasons. And I think we're right to consider to tweak it at this point by imposing term limits. This is New York City. Let's be daring. Let's not be afraid. I'm going to jump into my conclusion. I suggest the transition to term limits of a minimum of 10 to 12 years, and for smoothness, consider to let current board members be granted full agreed term going forward. I'm open to the suggestion of reappointment after a hiatus. I'm confident with the opportunity that with all the important business tasks to the community boards, it will be manageable to add a small task of being aware of training, designing, and implementing procedures that ensure institutional continuity and smooth transitions. It will strengthen community boards.
Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for letting me speak. My name is Marta Leberton. I am the former chairperson of Community Board 3. I have been on that board. This is my 15th year. I am speaking on my own opinion. It is not the opinion of the board. I feel that term limits should not be imposed on community boards. You are reappointed every 2 years. So you have to fill out that application every 2 years. And you run the risk of not being reappointed. We recently in our community had a transition with the council member. And before that council member left, I sent my application to that person. I also sent it to the new council member because I was not sure that I would be reappointed. And I was told, that's not going to happen. You'll be reappointed. But you don't know that. So every 2 years, you have to be reappointed to the board. And I think that's important because there is turnover. There are your core set of people who work on the board and who attend the meetings. And I do believe that attendance should not just be 10 meetings a year. It should be mandatory for committee meetings because we do a lot of work. I do work a full-time job and I do the community full-time. And I take pride in that. I started going to community board meetings when I was 17 years old. Excuse me. And I learned what the community board is. A lot of people today do not know what a community board is. When you tell them what it is, they're like, that exists? They cannot believe that a community board exists. When I was chairperson, we are the only community board that does an outdoor full board meeting in June. And we have continued that since I was chairperson. And it is wonderful to see people come out and ask, what is a community board? What do you do? How do you get on it? You let them know how to do that. I think the process is transparent because you get the application and you fill it out. You let your council member know who you are. The borough president appoints you. I was appointed through the former borough president, Helen Marshall. And I take pride in being that community board member. And I really think you're going to lose a lot of people. We have a lot of long-term members. You're going to lose them and the people that come in do not care, do not want to work. They think it's power and control to say, I am a board member, and that's not what it is. It is an agency from New York City. It's a New York City agency, and you're appointed, and you have to take pride in that. And I don't think that term limits are going to do that, because you're going to lose, and you're going to end up with boards with at least 10 members on each board in Queens.
Thank you so much.
This has become a really very thorny matter. My name is Clive Williams. I'm board chair, Community Board 13. First of all, I must defer to my board member, Mr. Bragg. Upon the days, I want to congratulate you for being on this very august commission. This is very emotional, the whole matter of term limits. I realize that it is almost divisive. I'm a newbie, and I'll give you a sense from where I come. I am a businessman. I'm a retired professional, and I went in a business, been in business for the last 18 years. And when I joined the community board, I saw a different side of bureaucracy. All the above that has been listed here, I saw. I saw the resistance to new members. I saw the staid position that this is how it is and it's not going to change. In fact, it can easily, and I speak as a chair, and this is my second go around, it could become a fiefdom. And I think the thing to guard against that is to, yes, apply term limits. On a cautionary note, though, term limits, if applied, can cause all the problems that has been elucidated here this evening. It can create a situation of attrition immediately. You're going to lose people. But I think we've got to look at organizations as we do organisms. They will grow. They will regrow, and they will regrow in maybe a better way. I think there has come a time, because of the tremendous diversity in our communities, that we need to be more inclusive. The major thing we have to accomplish is to, this has to be, the Charter Revision Commission has not just got to implement change by the pen, but you have to implement a psychological change. The way community boards are perceived. It's very important that this psychological shift be made, because if it isn't, then you'll be just a panel sitting up there listening to us, and business goes on as usual. And I hope this is not what results from this conversation. I truly believe that we can find answers. And if we impose term limits, then we've got to find a way to attract new members into our ranks. And the only way to do that is to raise the level of activity of community boards. I will guarantee you, if you walk out into any community, as diverse as they have become, and speak to 10 people in the streets and ask them about a community board, they don't know what the heck you're talking about. They don't know. Therefore, given the situation, we have to find a way to outreach now. Community boards have got to have enough funds to get out in the communities and let them know we're here, we're relevant, and we're here to help them. Do I have 30 seconds? Okay. In terms of standardizing and enhancing the existing appointment process, I don't think we have to we have to do a win-lose situation. It can be a win-win situation. I think I like the idea of the elected official, the borough president, but why not include the chair of the community board as well in this process of appointment? That way, it's a win-win for the community, because the community board chair or the community board knows who is capable of working. They know the history and the activities of the people in the community, and therefore they can advise both the elected official and the borough president as to who should be eligible to be a board member. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and I trust that all that we have said here this evening will at least be meaningful in the decisions that you make.
Thank you all so much. I actually have one question for Ms. Le Breton, because as Mr. Williams suggested, this has become very emotional, and there are people like Ms. Le Breton and other people who've testified who clearly have devoted so much time to their service in community boards. Ms. Le Breton, if this commission were to recommend term limits, and there were to be, of course, 1 year that present community board members could serve, do you think, as a person who's obviously devoted so much and who would want to be respected as such, you would be willing still to be an engaged community member as a public member, as some have suggested? Is there a way this can be a win-win so the institutional knowledge and commitment that you've shown and others have shown could still be present in the community board?
I think you need to grandfather them in. You have to grandfather them in. You have to grandfather in those long-term members. So for members who have been there, I'm going to say 15 years or more, they need to be grandfathered in.
For what period of time?
They need, if they want to, being that you're reappointed every 2 years, as long as you're reappointed, I think those members should stay. I think when you have a hiatus, what happens is you may still be involved, but you may not want to return. And that's what's going to happen. People will feel that, okay, now I can't be reappointed. I have to wait 2 years. I have to wait 3 years. At that time, they may not want to come back. And then you lose them completely, and then you lose them at the meetings.
Okay. All right, thank you. Any additional questions?
My question is for any of you. I wonder if you really believe that it would be difficult to fill the seats that might be vacated. And additionally, we've heard that in many community boards across the city, there are a number of vacant seats. Do you have any thoughts as to why?
I think I proposed that. I think it'd be difficult to fill these positions. We have to do an outreach to the community on a consistent basis. Right now, there's no knowledge, but most people in our communities are, except those in the know, except those who are political in their approach, they don't know about community boards. That's a fact. So what we need to do is find a way to outreach, to reach these people, to let them know that by participating with a community board, they are in fact participating in the civic process. They're helping their community.
I guess let me clarify my question. I guess I'm wondering if you truly believe that, for those of you who commented that it will be difficult to fill these seats, if you truly believe that there are not enough qualified or interested individuals out there who would want to serve. Because I do agree that there would be a need to increase awareness. Ms. Le Breton, you spoke to the issue of the vast majority of residents are not even aware that community boards exist. So if you could speak to that.
As a district manager who on a day-to-day runs a city agency, which is a community board, I can tell you that, yes, most people you got on the street, part of your outreach includes the little pamphlet that says, what is a community board? Getting to know your community board. That's a fact of life. You also have a situation where apathy in a society is rampant. And I know for a fact that my board is not at full capacity. Not every board is. And it will actually take more outreach for sure. But to lose 19 members pretty much overnight would hamstring us. In my bylaws, for example, in order to have, I believe, a public hearing, a monthly board meeting, you need to have a minimum of 26 members out of the proposed 50, and I would need 2 absences to have to cancel board meetings. This would create a significant problem for us, at least in the short term to the medium term, for sure.
Okay, how about one more comment? We have 3 additional
It seems logical that the Charter Commission would, I'm surprised to hear this 1-year mandate. Is this like a done deal in your proposal? Because it seems like a suggestion of grandfathering would be a smooth transition, and then in just a few years, the community would have a much broader knowledge of community boards, and there'd be no term, and there would be term limits. It would roll smoothly into broader awareness of the community when there are no term limits, because you'd have more people having a chance to get on the board.
All right, thank you so much. We really appreciate all of your testimony. Peter Beadle, Gary Giordano, John Kelly, and Yvonne O'Neill.
Good evening. I'm Peter Beadle, 20-year resident of Rego Park, an attorney, and a member of Community Board 6 for the last 6 years. Of course, all of my comments here are my personal ones. They're not reflective of the board. But thank you to the Commission for the opportunity to testify and for the important work that you're doing. I very much believe that community boards are one of the more important institutions that people have the potential to engage with on a regular basis in their communities. It provides people with some of the most direct access to the democratic process. But despite that, it doesn't meet that potential. And this great institution that could provide people an immediate way to get their concerns heard by this huge, complex city instead becomes one of the barriers to actually getting change happening in our communities. Community boards should not be the last bastion of the defense of the status quo, but that's very much how they operate. What needs to be done is we need to find ways to increase the transparency and the accessibility of our community boards so that you don't have people testifying that if you went on the street tonight and asked 10 people, 8 of them wouldn't even know what you were talking about. That testimony should spur us into very direct and immediate action to change the way that these boards are structured. When you look at the charter, there's an entire chapter on community boards, chapter 70. But when you look at it, it's jurisdictional. It tells you what kinds of things the community board should look at. But it doesn't structure it. It doesn't help these community boards function in a way that improves their accessibility. I came here rather torn on the issue of term limits. After listening to the testimony, I'm now convinced that it's absolutely necessary. This shouldn't be about defending the real estate of a certain group of people. It should be about opening this process to as many of us as possible. The idea of more along the 12-year timeline, I think, makes sense to address that institutional knowledge. But we need to make sure that our community board meetings are advertised. Everybody knows when every committee meeting is happening. It needs to be live streamed. The minutes need to be posted regularly so that that institutional knowledge is right there, that everybody has access to it. They're not just relying on that one person who always comes to the land use meeting to say, well, this has been going on for 15 years. No, we all need to be part of that. And also executive board members, I believe, need to have a shorter term limit. The chair wields a huge amount of power on the board, appointing committee members, chairs to those committees, and controlling the agenda. But yes, on term limits, and there needs to be real structure provided in the charter so that meetings are consistent from community board to community board, and the community has more access to those meetings.
Thank you so much.
Good evening, I'm Gary Giordano. I'm the District Manager of Community Board 5 in Queens. So maybe my testimony is a little more lengthy than the 3 minutes. First, I thank you all for doing this night after night. I know that can wear you down. You look quite, fit and fresh to me, so God bless you. I've heard criticism of community boards tonight, and I'm of the opinion that by empowering, for lack of a better term, up to 50 people within a community district, it may have been the most important structural improvement in the city of New York in the last 50 years. Board members have been the eyes and ears of communities. Board members do not have to get campaign contributions. The board members do not have to be beholden to those contributors or lobbyists or anyone else if they're doing their jobs correctly. We at Board 5 Queens have, I think, done a very, very good job of being as apolitical as humanly possible. We have not had the problems, in my opinion, and I'm pretty open-minded, that I'm hearing from other people, that the boards aren't very open. Anybody can come to any committee meeting of Community Board 5 as long as we can fit them in our space. And sometimes if the issue is a bit heated or controversial, they're standing room only at some of the committee meetings. I do agree that not enough people maybe know about their community board, but that's not a new thing. And I think more needs to be done to outreach to people that community boards exist and what their purpose is. But I think as Joe Morzolino said, you know, we live in a society where what percentage of the people voted in the last mayoral election? Just for instance, even in a presidential election, the amount of voter turnout is really a problem. I think that, and this is my own opinion, but I think that it's very dangerous to have term limits on community boards just for the sake of either having term limits or having turnover. I think by leaving a few spots open every year, that you can achieve a lot of that. We have community board members who would be very, very hard to replace, who have expertise with regard to reading plans, having been in construction, having been in the school system, attorneys. We have many, many people whose expertise would be very, very difficult to replace. We have gotten some good community board members in the last few years, and some young community board members. And I think as far as Board 5 goes, the borough president has done a good job as far as appointing some younger members who reflect the community change. But to have term limits just for the sake of having term limits, I think is a big mistake.
Thank you for your testimony.
My name is John Kelly, and I'm a Community Board 11 member, but if I'm quoted, please say they do not speak on behalf of the board. From my experience in business, I know that when a worker terminates from a job, they are generally gone 100% and no longer contribute any way to that corporation. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, is that better? Yes. Apologies. From my experience in business, I know that when a worker terminates from a job, they're generally gone 100% and no longer contribute in any way to that corporation. Other speakers may say implementing term limits on community board members would do the same thing, losing valuable experience, but that is patently not the case. The important piece that is often overlooked is the community aspect of community boards. All of our neighbors are invited to community board meetings, and everyone is given time to speak. The only distinction community board members should have is voting rights. Term limits move around voting rights so that votes can be more representational of the neighborhood today instead of being representational of the neighborhood 40 years ago. Term limits do not silence or remove those with experience. It merely moves them to the public comment period of a meeting with the rest of the neighborhood. Term limits stop the consolidation of power. After being appointed for 8 or 10 years, a retired community member should be able to influence the newer board members during the public comment period. If their opinions are not persuasive enough after a decade on the board, why are we defending their seat for more decades? When our founding fathers designed America's judicial branch, they set up a system where subject matter experts try to influence a rotating jury of everyday citizens. This checks the power of any one specific group, judges, prosecutors, or police, over the powers of the citizens. Community board term limits checks the power of any one subgroup by rotating voting rights much more often. But everyone is still encouraged to share their opinions and expertise so voting members can make the best decisions for the neighborhood. Just as judges, prosecutors, expert witnesses, etc. can use their specific knowledge to influence jurors, so can term-limited out-CV members influence the new members. Right now, I stand before a temporary committee trying to influence you through my words and experience. The system would be far less fair if your committee ruled for life and was able to ignore the changing community concerns and protect your personal interests. As a community board member, I asked you to propose a fixed term limit of 8 to 10 years for all community board members without a loophole of non-consecutive term limits. I know this will limit my voting rights time and will not undo the damage that other members have done over decades. But good governance reform is far more important than personal influence, title, or dynasty that many currently crave on the community boards today. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Good evening. I am Yvonne O'Neill. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, and the members of the Charter Revision Commission for your warm welcome the third evening in a row. I represent New York City for CEDAW, a grassroots movement of over 200 organizations advocating for New York City to adopt the principles of the 1979 UN Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW. We feel that the time is right and that the charter revision should take into account a gender equity perspective. This evening, I wish to talk about gender budgeting as it relates to CEDAW. Gender budgeting is not rocket science, nor is it pie in the sky. Gender budgeting is a strategy to achieve equality between women and men by focusing on how public resources are collected and spent. In a study by Jake Stosky titled Gender Budgeting, Fiscal Context and Current Outcomes, states, quote, "Gender budgeting is not a special approach to budgeting or even an add-on to budgeting. Rather, gender budgeting is an approach to budgeting that can improve it when fiscal policies and administrative procedures are structured to address gender inequality and women's development needs. When properly done, one can say that gender budgeting is good budgeting," end quote. The purpose of gender budgeting is threefold. One, to promote accountability and transparency in fiscal planning. Two, to increase gender-responsive participation in the budget process, for example, by undertaking steps to involve women and men equally in budget preparation. And three, to advance gender equality and women's rights. Effective implementation of gender budgeting requires political commitment matched with a technical capacity for gender mainstreaming. Engaged leadership is of particular importance to ensure that gender equality is integrated into the planning and budgeting processes and that public budgets, revenues, and expenditures benefit women and men equally. Key enabling factors for gender budgeting include political will and political leadership, high-level commitment of public administrative institutions, improved technical capacity of civil servants, civil society involvement, and sex disaggregated data. Does New York City have the political commitment to implement CEDAW and gender budgeting? Madam Vice Chair, it warms my heart that you and Ms. Wendy Weiser and Ms. Sharon Greenberger are very knowledgeable where CEDAW is concerned, as I'm sure that some of the other commissioners also are. I urge you and these esteemed commissioners on the Charter Revision Commission to lead the way for the other commissioners in understanding why a gender equality framework in the Charter for New York City, as the capital city of the world, to truly being the leader in living out the CEDAW principles and implementing gender budgeting. If we are truly serious about civic engagement and the welfare of the citizens of New York City, we can do no less. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the commissioners? All right, thank you all so much for your testimony.
Thank you very much.
Former Councilmember Archie Springer, Sheila Katzman, Pramat Kumar, and Ethan Felder, please. So it appears that the former council member may not be present. Oh, I'm sorry, sir. I expected you, I think, to be on the left.
I'm here.
I apologize.
I started, when I learned of this meeting this morning, and someone from the councilman's office called me, and we were talking about something else. He said, by the way, do you know that the Charter Commission is having a meeting tonight, 6 o'clock at Borough Hall? I said, no, I didn't know about it. And he said that he had sent out on their mailing list, and later as I looked at it, I saw it. So I called Community Board 12, and I said, well, and she said, well, they had put it on their Facebook page, whatever that is. So I think the work of this commission, if you're serious about it, you would need a much larger room to hold a meeting than this. If you're talking about a borough with 2.5 million people, if you're serious about what you're doing, so when I walked in, I said, do I want to testify? Well, I got a lot to say, but I don't know what to say because I don't know what you're talking about. Now, I can recall having been exposed to the Charter in my prior life and work, but I think you should do a more vigorous out. And I read here that you've held 5 hearings or meetings already. Is that correct?
Actually, this is we held 5 public hearings before the initial report, and this is our 4th, and there'll be 5 public hearings after the preliminary staff report.
So there are going to be more hearings?
Yes.
So I would recommend that you do a very serious outreach and let people know that this Charter Revision Commission exists and what its purpose is. Because I assure you, they don't know. I don't know if it's 13, 12? I don't see anybody, and we have a fairly sophisticated community board, and we have a fairly sophisticated community, and I would assure you, had they known about this, more of us would be here tonight. Just one comment on community board. I support term limits, but it should be staggered so that you don't wipe out half the board, or so that there's a continuity. But I just learned that sitting here. I didn't come prepared to testify. I just got it. So if you could have more outreach, I think the city population would appreciate it. And I'll be back and I'll testify. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We very much appreciate that you're here, and we will you have other opportunities to share your insights. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Sheila Katzman, and I am president of the International Association for Women in Radio and Television, USA. I am the chair of New York City for CEDAW, a volunteer organization in New York City that is part of the Cities for CEDAW national movement. I just want to kind of get off script a little and said, most people didn't know about this, neither did I, and we never met with Helen Rosenthal recently in her office, we wouldn't have known that, there was a revision happening, there was, these meetings taking place. So I think you can have more turnout if public outreach. I, concur with the former council member here. I'm going to jump right into it. I want to kind of speak on some of the focus areas because I've been educated 2 days now on what the charter is about, and I am not from a community board. Right, so I'm the odd one out at this table, perhaps, right? Instead of women being recognized as over half the population, they're being treated as marginalized minority. Specific narrow issues are defined as women's issues and relegated to the women's committee. Where is the men's committee? All other issues are determined as not as women's issues, such as campaign finance. municipal elections in New York City, civic engagement, community boards, and the districting process are all women's issues. Please do not overlook the explicit effects of the different proposals upon women. The Articles of CEDAW are a good framework to do this. In fact, it is a good framework to look at the effect on women of all government activities. One of the policy areas is campaign finance. While reviewing the New York City campaign finance is laudable, this must additionally examine the role of women and gender in relation to campaign finance. We have observed that the numbers of women in the City Council has diminished. We want to explicitly ensure that campaign finance is not the reason for that. Community boards are another important focus area, and the most important when it comes to communities and putting the people who live in the community at the fore. This has dominated both the hearings in Brooklyn and the Bronx, and here tonight also, and thereby shows a kind of urgency. Presenters were calling for diversity in training and for politics to be taken out of appointments and given back to the community. However, as long as community boards are appointed by elected officials, they will answer to them and not to the communities they're supposed to represent. We recommend using petitioning as a way of appointing members. Petitioning will force prospective board members to face the community they serve and explain the role of community boards and hopefully convince the public to participate.
Okay, if you could wrap up your comments,
I will.
Thank you.
Surely community boards and civic engagement seem to be overlapping cohorts, as one would seem to complement the other. It is through these boards that the community should be educated about civic activities and the public right to participate. And lastly, and there's much more that you will have there, but I want to just say the districting process, because women head most households, their voices must count.
Thank you so much, and we will read. We promise to read the written comments as well.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Pramit Kumar, and I'm a member of Queens Community Board 6, which encompasses the neighborhoods of Frigo Park and Forest Hills, where I grew up and have lived most of my life. Like many other people, I'd like to talk about community boards tonight. Queens community boards do not currently represent the demographic diversity of Queens. As a young, brown immigrant person, I wouldn't say that I'm particularly unique in this borough. There's a lot of us here, but I'm unfortunately somewhat unique on my board. To help make community boards look more like their communities, we need to establish term limits. The appeals to safekeeping institutional knowledge they seem to me to be vastly overblown. There are many other ways to take the long view on a position other than to keep appointing the same people year after year, decade after decade. Community board membership should not be a lifetime appointment. I'll take fresh perspectives over institutional knowledge any day. We need to establish fair and transparent appointment criteria that are applied across the board, regardless of tenure, so we don't discourage passionate people trying to get newly involved. There are about 120,000 people who live in Forest Hills and Rego Park. I find it very hard to believe that if term limits were instituted, there would be a shortage of qualified applicants. The real problem isn't lack of qualified applicants, it's the problem is lack of outreach. Most New Yorkers have no idea what the board is or what it does, which is to be expected because the board does a very poor job of publicizing what it does. Yes, the board has a website where it posts upcoming meetings, agendas, and minutes, but very few people know about the site or use it. So much neighborhood discourse is increasingly taking place online on platforms like Facebook and Twitter, which our board at least is conspicuously absent from. Community boards must be properly resourced so they can actively manage online communications and go where the people are and where the local conversations are happening. I hope this commission takes these issues seriously. Without community boards that are diverse, embrace new members, and truly invite interaction with residents, boards risk becoming insular and ineffective. Thank you for your time.
If Jean Silva could also come up and testify so we could fill out the panel. Is Jean Silva here? Melissa Barnes. Thank you so much.
Hello.
We didn't mean to catch you off guard.
No, it's quite all right. Thank you. Hello, everyone.
Can you put your mouth a little closer to the mic so we can make sure we hear you?
Hi. Hello, everyone. My name is Melissa Barnes, and I live within Community Board 6. Just to say that, and I'm just going to say a couple of things. The first reason why I wanted to speak up is completely off topic of community boards, which is I just would like to see the laws enforced when it comes to bicycles. I have seen too many bicycles blow through red lights and in front of police, and nothing happens, and it's an issue of public safety. And I would really like to see them have license plates and take a written test to make sure they know the traffic laws, etc. So there's that. The second thing I would like to address is about community boards. Simply that I actually myself did apply to get on a community board, and I know someone in Brooklyn who's in politics, and they were like, oh, you got to know somebody to get on the community board. And I was like, oh, no, really. And then, sure enough, I didn't get picked, just for a first-time choice. I became interested in it. I didn't know anything about it, but I was interested, but it didn't seem like I really did need to know somebody. So I think that there may be some cronyism, or just it's a closed space, or maybe not open. I don't know. I don't know what that's about, but it should be examined, and a way to deal with that would be to deal with term limits to make sure that everybody's voices are getting heard. And I also think that if someone does not want to participate in a community board simply because they cannot be on the board and have a vote, then you really probably should look at the motivations for being on that board. And lastly, I just want to say that I believe in an equality for all, and that means we talk about race and gender and so forth. Everyone should be treated the same. We shouldn't have to be talking about men getting paid more than women, et cetera. It's the same job, the same pay. It's equality for all. That's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any questions from the commissioners? Thank you all very much for your testimony, and thank you so much, City Council member, for being here. Richard David, Laura Shepard, Stephen Adele, and John Cho. So if we could start on our left, your right, please.
After the September 11th attack in 2001, then Mayor Giuliani demanded an unprecedented 3-month emergency extension of his term, arguing that he was indispensable in restoring law and order. In 2008, utilizing a similar argument, then Mayor Bloomberg convinced the City Council to extend term limits in violation of popular referenda because he was considered indispensable and chaos would result if he was not mayor for another 4 years. Tonight, you will hear certain members of our community board claim that they are also indispensable, that the loss of their institutional knowledge and the expertise that they have will cripple governments and destroy our democracy. I have attended community board meetings for more than 15 years, and I can assure you that that is not the case. In fact, I would argue that the lack of term limits for appointed officials is even more dangerous. Case in point, Robert Moses, an unelected official who garnered unchecked power and destroyed many neighborhoods in our city. When given an opportunity this year to approve a health clinic that would serve 40,000 additional low-income immigrants, CB7, my community board, had no qualms about rejecting the proposal, endangering the lives of the most vulnerable in our community. The lack of diversity is symbolic of broader structural dysfunction, where community boards lack the resources, the technology, and the staff to effectively fulfill their planning and advisory role. In CB7, the most populous and linguistically diverse community board in the city, we lack staff who speak Korean and the Chinese dialects spoken by most of the recent immigrants who live in our community. How can such a community board be the eyes and ears of a community when they do not even speak the language? My neighbors and I cannot afford another decade of missed opportunities and unfulfilled needs. There's too much at stake, and I urge the Charter Revision Commission to act. In a real democracy, no one is indispensable. Let's move on and enact term limits so that we can focus on the many important issues that need to be addressed in our community. Thank you.
Could you identify yourself for the record, please?
John Cho.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Laura Shepard, and I'm here to share some of my experiences. I began covering community boards as a journalist when I was 23 years old, shortly after I graduated from college. Among other reforms, I strongly support term limits and codifying their role as advisory on all decisions with environmental consequences. Unelected boards should not have veto power over city agencies. Community boards have a lot of problems with regards to transparency, accountability, and even democracy. Most people in New York City do not know their community board number, what powers it has, when it meets, or how to get on it. Even my best friends, native New Yorkers, graduates of city-specialized high schools and elite universities do not know these things. If the system were more visible, it would have no problem attracting smart, talented people who are committed to improving their communities and tackling global challenges. Even those who do know of their existence find them baffling. There are stark inconsistencies between the boards. They start and end at different times. They follow different procedures. Some have robust discussions about everything from major construction projects to sidewalk cafe licenses out in the open, while others just rubber stamp their committee votes. I've covered nearly 3-hour meetings before where only 1 or 2 people even speak until public comment. Most frustratingly, some do not even allow public comment before meetings or before voting on relevant issues. Not allowing public comment until 10 p.m. discourages working people and parents from attending meetings at all. Once I criticized a board chair for doing this, and he replied, "We are the public," when in fact he was appointed and should welcome community input. If board members didn't feel like their appointments were life sentences, members may welcome more public engagement, knowing that they would eventually end up on the other side. Because of lack of turnover, some see their boards as their personal kingdoms. There's also the lack of transparency. Websites are rarely up to date, do not list current members, their neighborhoods, or how long they've served. I've tried to contact boards as a journalist and a citizen to ask simple questions, and often had to wait 2 to 3 weeks for simple answers. And you shouldn't need a member's personal cell phone number to have a question like, what was a vote count, answered. As far as the lack of diversity goes, the longtime members consistently overvalue longtime residency. People preface statements by telling you what hospital they were born at, where they went to elementary school, how long they've been married, as if that makes their word gospel. This also turns community members into echo chambers for the most provincial and reactionary elements. And this is off-putting to new residents, to immigrants, and to young people. There are so few young women on boards, and I'm not surprised. As a journalist, I often had my questions answered with things like, "Talk to me after the meeting, sweetheart." And there are also, oh, I guess I'm out of time.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. My name is Stefan Adel. I'm the project director for New York Working Families, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to the board, the commission, and thank all of you for your work and your hardworking staff. I'm not going to talk about community boards, although I feel as if I should, as somebody who is not a community board member and has often gone to those meetings and has strong feelings. But I'm going to focus my comments on responding to a couple of the points, primarily about campaign financing in the initial staff report. Generally, I agree with the recommendations in the staff report. Its focus on democracy, strengthening our democracy in this moment is incredibly needed. The focus on campaign finance, elections, civic engagement, and reforming our community boards, as well as districting process, will strengthen the city and protect New Yorkers in a really critical moment. However, in this moment, I want to push you all, and in this national context, to be a little bolder. Right? The board is working very fast with limited resources to go through a tremendous amount of feedback, and there are some great ideas in there, not only that you've looked at and dig into, but that have sort of gone by the wayside. Specifically, there are some that you are addressing where I think you could go bolder. Reducing campaign limits is one of the key donation limits is one of the key tools that you address. but we consider in the staff proposal only reducing it by roughly half. We think that those should be reduced as much as possible legally, right? And that could look much more like what the average New Yorker donates to a participating candidate, under $500, or a limit around there. And it should be reduced for non-participating candidates as much as legally possible, right? We could have a very different political system in this city and demonstrate a very different political culture for this country if, in fact, we had a system that really focused on low-income, low-dollar donors. Substantially increasing matching funds and the cap on matching funds is part of that. We need to make sure that participating in the system actually pays for candidates and pays for campaigns that can stand up to, candidates who can self-fund, to billionaires and rich folks who can easily step out of the system and raise enough money to run much larger campaigns than the current system allows. Additionally, there are things that the board commission in the recommendations didn't include, that were included in other or in the commentary that are much bolder, right? We could do more. And in this moment, I would encourage you to really look back at all those ideas and think about how you can be more aggressive. Whether that is bringing in those who can't actually afford to make campaign donations through something like the Seattle Democracy Vouchers, other ways that were proposed also are very interesting. And I know I have limited time, but I'll submit testimony as well. There's another point where, looking at it, that was sort of passed over. The current system looks at internal communications from unions and members of organizations, and organizations to their members as donations, and I'd strongly urge you to consider doing otherwise. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Richard David. I live in Southeast Queens, and I'm happy to offer the following comments, suggestions, and observations to this commission. I've been on Community Board 9 for the last 10 years, and I'm in favor of term limits. But I don't think term limits by themselves go far enough. I think that other efforts to standardize community boards would go further, including things like how key committees are formed, the number of committees, the kinds of committees, the officer positions, and descriptions for those roles and responsibilities that go along with them. In addition to that, standardizing bylaws across community boards would also go a far way. I think that standardization is important, but each community board is very different, so leaving room for interpretation and other things will also allow boards to reflect their neighborhoods. I want to also talk about about municipal elections. I recently ran for the City Council in District 28. That's also in Southeast Queens. I came in second. Unfortunately, in that election, I achieved the most votes of any South Asian or Guyanese or Indo-Caribbean voter in New York City. That's actually a sad thing because it goes directly to the point about redistricting. It goes directly to the point about how we do municipal elections here. I'm in favor of a system where we're able to vote across party lines. A lot of voters are registered as independent and are therefore, although registered to vote, unable to vote at all. In a system where California, if we implemented a system where California, some local bodies allow citizens to vote across party lines and the candidates with the most votes across party lines run off in a general election, and that's how they determine the winner. I think that would be a very useful system to look at and want to consider here in New York City. The last point I want to talk about is how city agencies collect data and how that data is used to implement policies and how they provide programs across New York City. So I'm Guyanese. We're the fifth largest immigrant group in all of New York City. Unfortunately, not a single city agency collects data about my ethnic group. So although I'm Guyanese, I happen to be Indo-Caribbean. And so although my community faces increasing and higher rates of suicide, domestic violence, and other things, we're unable to respond to these things as a community and as a city because we don't have data to correlate with this population. So I would encourage city agencies and codify it in ways that they have to collect data. In addition, the mayor uses the lack of this information to deny Hindus, for example, public holidays, because the absence of data has allowed him to say that we don't know how many Hindus are in our public school system, for example. I've also offered written testimony, which I hope you'll consider, that touch on redistricting and other points that are very important to our city. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions from the commissioners?
Yeah, I have a question for the speaker for the Working Families proposal, and I'm sorry I didn't catch your name.
It's Stefan Adel.
I appreciate your comments and your supportive comments about the work that this commission's doing on campaign finance. And I just want to see if we agree on a couple of things. You indicated in your statement that you think we should reduce the contribution limit as far as legally viable. I take it you would agree that if we reduce it further and result in the system being declared unconstitutional by a court, that we would be making a mistake, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think lowering it to a point where it's clearly going to be challenged is a bad decision. I think lowering it to the point where it's, aggressive and we can have that debate, and certainly there are other people far more expert than I about how likely it is to be challenged.
And you raised the possibility that we might change the rules in some respect to make it more likely that candidates would opt out of the system and either self-fund campaigns or fund campaigns through large contributions of the sort permitted under the state law but prohibited under the city law. So I take it you'd agree that if we make it too hard for candidates to raise the money needed to run an effective campaign, we'd be making a mistake, right?
I mean, I think there's a nuance to it. If we make it restrictive enough, it will change who runs within the system and who runs out of it. That I agree with you. I don't know that I think that's a problem, right? I think forcing people in the system to run with essentially all small dollar donations would lead to a different candidate pool. And that, I don't know that having people choose to participate or not participate and leaving that distinction very stark is necessarily a bad thing. But it would change who runs within the system.
So it's just my opinion. I, as one commissioner, support lowering the contribution limit as long as we take measures to offset that, to provide the public funding necessary for people to run effective campaigns. But I think that taking a position that cutting the contribution limit, for instance, by 50% is not a bold position or is not actually a radical position. I question that, and I'm very concerned that in our enthusiasm for what we think we can do in a progressive New York City, that we end up undermining this system by cutting contribution levels to a point that the federal courts have never endorsed and that this Supreme Court is highly unlikely to endorse, and that we end up seeking the perfect, and the perfect can be the enemy of the good. So I would encourage you and your group to think about the significance of what we're doing and appreciate the supportive comments, and hope that you will be when we make a final proposal.
My question is for Mr. David. I wonder if I appreciate your testimony, and particularly around the issue of redistricting, which I'm personally very familiar with what occurred in 2010 in your district. I wonder if you have an opinion around how the redistricting commission should be put together and composed, whether through appointments or any other ways, and whether the composition of the commission has any effect on how the lines are drawn.
I mean, absolutely, starting bottom up. Mm-hmm. Of course, the composition of the commission members influence heavily, even if not entirely, how the outcomes of the line look, and that's what we saw last time. Now, I've heard other presenters talk about a commission that appoints a commission and other efforts. Certainly, those, I would encourage those. I think they're better than the system we have now. But I think as long as we're limited to using race as the sole barrier to drawing district lines, we will end up with a flawed process. I think other other considerations can include things like housing. You know, if you have a neighborhood like mine where it's 1 and 2 family homes and it's grouped with an adjacent neighborhood with skyscrapers, our needs are going to be very different. And our elected officials' priorities will also be very different, and they will more likely respond to the area with skyscraper housing because there are more people that live there. And so I think we have to look at beyond race. We have to look at you know, how the neighborhoods are made up when we're drawing district lines. And I think that we have to look at factors beyond race when we're appointing commission members.
All right, thank you all so much for your testimony. So our final panel is Jessamy Manis, James Gallagher Jr., and Lorraine Gittins-Bridges, and Ingrid Gomez.
Hi, my name is Jessamy Hannes. I am a resident of Rego Park, and I'm a community member. And I, many years ago, started going to my community board. I was interested in finding out what it did, getting involved perhaps. And I actually volunteered to be a citizen member of the Transportation Committee, and I was told that the committee didn't meet. And then many years pass, and I find out, in fact, that there have been meetings from time to time. And more recently, I was finally able to attend one. And the first time I tried to go to one of these committee meetings, I rang the doorbell, and the look on the face from the district manager was, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" And when I walked in, that's actually what he said to me. And I said, "I'm a community member." And he and the chair, both on multiple times before the meeting began, told me I was not allowed to speak. I was not allowed to ask questions. And I said, okay, all right, that's how you run the meeting. And they came back multiple times to reiterate that. You know, when they have a full board meeting, they don't have the public comment until after they take votes. But I've also been to Queens CB1, CB2, CB4, CB5, CB9, and CB7, and Brooklyn CB2, and a couple of Manhattan boards, and every single one of them runs their meetings differently. Every single one of them. And it's all the whim of whoever's running that meeting, whatever chairperson is running that board. And we talk a lot about institutional knowledge, but I think there is serious institutional blockage. And when I think about how hostile they were to me coming in, a little blonde white woman, and I can't imagine what it would be like to be a person of color trying to get involved in the community and to have had that reception from these men, I think I would have interpreted that a specific way. And so I just think that we need to have more of a uniform meeting structure to maybe accommodate if we have term limits. If we have a uniform meeting structure, that institutional knowledge might not be such a big issue because we have a system in place that everybody has to follow. So.
Thank you.
Well, good evening. My name is James Gallagher Jr., and I'm a member of Community Board 8, which you didn't get to visit, unfortunately. Anyway, to the Charter Revision Commission, you guys are doing a fantastic job. I'm so happy I came tonight because I'm learning so much and see so many people. My question is not about term limits. Mine is about education for the community board members. I would like to see city planning and the Department of Buildings offer classes on rules regarding zoning and land use. Years ago at Queens College, I took, as part of the real estate program over there, I took a class, adult education, for 7 weeks on our zoning and so forth, and it was very, very informative. And then they discontinued it from their program, but I would like to see the city agencies offer these programs for community board members because they need to learn all the rules and regulations. I didn't mention that I also work for DEP, so I just wanted to put that out, and I'm president of the Fresh Meadow Homeowners Civic, and I'm so happy I came tonight, and I just wanted to pass the word on to everyone. And Joe Marzigliano used to work for us at Community Board 8, so we're very proud of him and his position now. And I want to thank Vicki Morales for the great job that she's doing here on the community boards for the borough president and for Ms. Tannenbaum for the great work that she does also with community outreach. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to thank the Commission for giving us this opportunity to voice our concerns. Thanks to our member from Community Board 13, we were informed about this meeting and we had an opportunity to look at the proposals. I'm going to keep this relatively short and to the point.
Can I ask you one favor?
Oh, my name is Lorraine Gibbons
Thank you.
Bridges. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Okay. I just want to talk about, number one, term limits. I agree that there should be term limits, but I also hear what the other board members across this, that have spoke earlier have said. You always got to be concerned, will there be people to replace them? And one of the things that I'm suggesting, that after the I agree that there should be 12 years of term, the term limits should end after 12 years, but I also agree that if there should be some type of stipulation that if no one else steps up after extensive outreach, then let the members that are up resume. Just give other people an opportunity to, do the outreach within the community, let people know what community boards are about, because that's an issue. And then if nobody else steps up, then let the people stay, because you don't want to have a situation where, people are not given an opportunity. So that's what I have to say about term limits, 12 years with a stipulation if nobody else steps up, because you don't want to have a situation where there's nobody there. Number two is the appointment process. I don't believe that should be changed at this point, only for the fact that I'm more education. I've been on the education councils for many years, and I've been involved in that arena. And we do have it where people can vote, but unfortunately, there's not enough outreach to get people to come out to vote. We also have with our city council members having participatory budgeting and stuff like that, and even those where voting with people, it's still not a large turnout. And these are the things that we really have to work on, trying to really engage the community a little bit more before we start shutting certain doors. So leave the process for the appointment for right now, maybe somewhere down the line after we do better, then open it back up for change. Then last but not least, it's the outreach. Outreach, we really need to do a better job with the outreach. I would like to see some funding come to the community boards to help with outreach. People don't know what the community boards are. If it wasn't for the fact that Adrienne Adams, who is now one of our city council members, that she didn't come to one of my PTA meetings, I would have never heard of community boards. So I suggest more funding go to outreach. Then also training. We also have to try to train the community board members a little bit more and make sure they know what they're doing. Last but not least, also, when community board members don't show up for a certain period of time, I believe that they need to be removed. I've seen situations where community board members are on paper and they're not showing up to our meetings, and something needs to be done about that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak before you. I'm Ingrid Gomez. I am an activist and organizer. I'm also the youth chair for Community Board 4. I've been a member for 2 years, since 2016, and I was just reappointed. So just to the point that my friend here next to me spoke about, the idea that many people on our board don't end up showing up to meetings. We have poor attendance, and I think this is unfortunate because it is a privilege to be part of a community board, and when you don't see active participation, that really is disheartening because, again, it's an important part of our civic duty to show up to these meetings. So with that in mind, I really do agree that with a lot of people here that there should be looked into how to remove members who are not active. I know that the borough president can do that. I also believe when I read part of the bylaws that the community board can do it itself, but I don't see it enacted. So people who don't show for years, I've been on the board for 2 years, and I know some people who have not come for an entire year or more. So that's really unfortunate, and I do believe that that has to be worked on. Also, term limits, I believe in that as well. No one should sit on a board for 50, 60 years, although I do appreciate those members who are very committed, who are dedicated, who show up and have been part of the community board leadership. But that's the exception and not the rule. So that's very important to me. The other issue is about public members. So Community Board 4 has an opportunity, maybe like others, I don't know how many others, where you can become a public member by applying and filling out an application with a couple of questions about your interest in being a part of the board. And these members have an opportunity to then, ask to be appointed, right? So speak to their council member and express interest. So that's a way that we can see this person is serious. This person wants to participate. They've come to all the committee meetings. And so I think that Community Board 4 is pretty much at the forefront of that, and I think that it should be sort of standardized, within others' community boards. Just, again, to encourage public members to be a part of committees so that then they can later become board members. Educating the community is quite important. I am part of a board that's very diverse. I have to say that. We have people from all over the globe. And so that's a great thing, but we still don't have enough education. We need to educate better our communities so they know what we do. Thank you so much for this time.
Thank you so much. Any questions from the commissioners? May I have a motion?
Well, before that, can I make a statement? Sure, of course. Thank you. I had to understand. So, Madam Vice Chair, I'd just like to take this opportunity to correct a misstatement I made last night in last night's hearing in Brooklyn when I responded to a speaker's comments to me regarding the authority of this commission. I said this commission is here to listen to the citizens of the city. What I meant to say was we are here to hear from the residents of this city. My misstatement was in no way meant to marginalize or dismiss any of the many comments, suggestions, ideas, recommendations that have come before this commission to address the inequities that exist in our city's democracy with those who live here but are not yet citizens, our immigrant population, but contribute greatly and enrich our city and society. I wanted to be clear that this commission takes extremely serious those recommendations that have been presented to advance a more fair and equitable city government that would be accountable and open to all its residents and allow both greater access and a full participation of our city government and its governance. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much. Any additional comments? Thank you all. This has been an absolutely fantastic meeting. I feel like the quality and thoughtfulness that all of you put into your testimony really says an enormous amount for this amazing borough. So seriously, this has been a wonderful meeting, and thank you all so much for being present, for testifying, for staying throughout the meeting, and just we appreciate it a great deal.
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
Second.
Adjourn.
Excellent.